Good morning. Happy Friday. This is just, a little, backstory about me. Not that I'm important, but why I believe what I believe, or how I came to believe what I believe, and how what I believe is, interestingly enough, becoming mainstream, which is weird to me. Let's go back a little bit. Most of my life, I did basically the bare minimum to get by. You work. I'm unfortunately smart, which allows me just to skate with minimal effort, get good results with minimal effort. But most of my adult life, I didn't want kids, didn't want a wife, and I just did the bare minimum to get by. I love to play video games, hang out with friends, stuff like that. Fun stuff. Stuff that made me, what I thought, happy. And about about 5 or 6 years ago, let's say 6 years ago, I had a bit of an epiphany. A cousin was taking care of his aging mother, and he didn't have any kids. And his siblings all had kids, and so he kind of had dedicated his life to taking care of his parent. And I thought, it's awesome for his mom that he's available for her like that. But I thought, wow, he wasted his life. He literally wasted his life, because he is now elderly, and when his very elderly mother dies, what has he got? He's just going to die alone. There's not going to be any children there to help him when he's needing the help. And then I realized that I was in that position. That was literally the position that I was in. I had money, every month my bank balance grew. I'm like, what am I going to do with this? I have everything I want. I don't need anything else. What am I going to do? What am I going to do with, am I going to be buried with this? And thinking long and hard about it, and I did think long and hard about it, I came to the realization that I wanted kids. And if I wanted kids, I wanted a wife. Now, I'd been with my wife at that point for a long time, 2 decades-ish. And I always told her from the get-go, from the day I started dating her, not from the day, but from the day we actually started to seriously date. Look, just so you know, I'm never getting married and I'm never having kids. Anyway, I asked her to marry me and I asked her to have kids, and she said yes, so thankfully. And then when my first child was born, it was very interesting because, it went from kind of a selfish who's going to look out for me when I die to, my world essentially kind of started revolving around this child. I had a sense of duty. I had a sense of purpose. It gave me a sense of fulfillment to be taking care of this child. It gave me a peace, it's I don't know the exact word for it, but it made everything else make sense. It made why I go to work every day make sense. It made why I was paying a mortgage make sense. It made everything make sense. Everything kind of fell into order. My purpose, my role, my, duty in life all made sense. And that got me thinking, how did I end up in this position where I wasted my youth. I'm an old man now. I wasted my youth saying, I don't want a wife and I don't want kids. And yet a wife and kids have fulfilled me, have made me, I don't really know how to say it. It's not happy, not in a temporal sense. There's struggles with kids and everything like that, and struggles with your wife and everything like that. But fulfilled, I guess, is the best word. It got me to thinking, like, how did I end up in that position? Why was I thinking that? Why was I advocating for positions that were like detrimental to me, to my health, to my well-being, to the country's health and well-being? And then I started actually seeing, because like I was thinking about it, I started seeing the culture. Culture is normally something you don't see. Propaganda, especially in culture, is something that you don't see. Unless it's jarring, unless it's poorly done, you don't see it. And the best propaganda becomes part of the culture. And the people start spreading that propaganda. Unknowingly, unwillingly, unwittingly. And so it's like, it's part of our cultural soup. This propaganda that, marriage is bad. Most marriages end in divorce. If you have kids, they cost a bunch of money and you can't like go travel the world. You've got to take care of these little snotty brats and blah, 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 right? Kids, instead of being a blessing, instead of being something amazing, instead of something that gives you purpose and fulfills your kind of role as a human being, are a negative thing. They're a burden. That is the craziest thing ever. Why does our government do that? Why does our government allow that? The government's always talking about birth rates are below replacement, so we have to import all these people from all these other different cultures. And I was thinking, like, I used to sure, fine, whatever, I was always against just like open borders, but like, take the best and brightest. Make sure they can speak, read, and write English proficiently before you bring them in. Make sure that they have something of value to add to the country before you bring them in. But I never really concerned myself much about why we have to do that. It started me thinking about, why do we allow no-fault divorce? Because most divorces that I deal with, 70-80% of them, there's kids involved. And divorces are just terrible for kids. They're just absolutely terrible for kids. They're no fun for the parents to go through, but they're just terrible for the kids. And you go from a 1 or 2 income family where all of the resources are going towards housing the whole family, and those resources are available for the kids, to having to have 2 separate households. So no matter how you slice it, you have less income available for those kids. You have less parental time and attention because, I have my kids 50% of the time, the other party has the kids 50% of the time. Well, when you were together, each party had the kids 100% of the time. And so if one parent was unavailable for whatever reason, the other parent was, generally speaking, going to be there. They're terrible for kids. Single parent situations, like I'm not trying to denigrate anybody who is a single parent, but it's terrible for the kids. Absolutely terrible. Having a kid outside of marriage is just absolutely terrible for the kids. There are no studies that show that they do better than kids who grow up in married, where the parents are married and stay married through the child's growing up years at least. Every study shows that those kids do worse. So why as a society do we put things in place that allow that to happen? The terrible food that we allow, the terrible pharmaceuticals that we allow, the terrible vaccines that we allow. I'm not an anti-vaxxer by any stretch of the imagination. But the state has essentially removed choice about when children get vaccinated and what they have to get vaccinated for. My daughter got a Hep B vaccine. Why? Why did my daughter get a Hep B vaccine? She's not going to have sex, hopefully, knock on wood, for another, at least 15, 16, 17 years. Hopefully, knock on wood. She's not going to do drugs, hopefully, knock on wood, intravenous drugs or whatever for her lifetime. But she's certainly not going to do them when she's not even a toddler yet. Why did she have to get a Hep B vaccine? It removed my choice, but she had to get that vaccine in order to be able to go to daycare. All this propaganda pushing young women into careers during their most fertile years. And then now we have a huge industry, which I benefited from. I mean, I'm not going to lie to you. I benefited from the IVF industry. But why do we have to rely on that? Excuse me. That is a huge cost. I mean, don't get me wrong. That was expensive. I could have paid off most of the house with what I paid to have kids. Which means, most women who get to that age won't be able to afford it. Especially if they can't use their own eggs or something like that. I mean, it gets... So we have all of this embedded cultural propaganda against it. Everything makes having kids harder. Everything makes having kids more expensive. Everything pushes you to not have kids. And the only thing and the way like taxes work and everything like that. I mean, your average person under the age of 30 can't buy a house. Just cannot. And not being able to buy a house means you're less likely to have a family. People, generally speaking, don't want to have kids if they're living in an apartment, living paycheck to paycheck. They're looking at the cost and they're saying, I can't afford this. And the way our tax system works is, the young people who are working try to get ahead. They're paying a significant portion of their taxes to subsidize the wealthiest generation, the people who can't have kids, who aren't producing income, generally speaking. They're subsidizing the boomers, the wealthiest generation. The generation that still has more assets than any other generation. And yet, the kids, in the years where they should be starting families, are making a lot less money because we've exported most of the industry. We've exported most of the jobs. We've imported a ton of inexpensive labor. And so the kids can't afford to have families at the expense of the oldest generation. Why is our tax system like that? Why do we disincentivize the young? You get a $2,000 tax credit per child, if I remember correctly. $2,000. How is a young person making $30,000 a year supposed to be able to start a family? With, looking at it, if they have a choice, how are they supposed to say, you know what, I am financially in a position where I can afford this cost? Because kids are expensive. I mean, don't get me wrong, they are expensive. They're little mouths that need to eat, their diapers that need to be bought, their daycare that you need to pay for. Daycare is insane. I mean, $100 a day a child, you're looking at about $5,000 a month for 2 kids. About $7,500 a month for 3 kids. Who can afford that? So we have this whole thing in place that keeps people from doing the thing that brings fulfillment. Everything makes it harder. Everything makes it harder. 8 weeks of pregnancy leave at most in California. That's, to me, that's a little bit insane. Putting 8-week-old kids in daycare to have somebody else raise them because a single man, generally speaking, in that kind of age range, can't afford to keep his wife at home, to let her raise the children. And we have a system in place where women are out earning men, and women like to find men and marry them who make more than they do. They like to marry up, economically speaking. Like we just disincentivize everything. And that led me to the conclusion, I think I finally arrived at it in early of 2024, and I made videos on it, I know, that the government hates you and wants you dead. And people are like, that's insane, John, that's insane. Well, to round this story to a close, Tucker Carlson, I don't know when he made the video, he did a interview with Marjorie Taylor Greene. I don't recommend the interview with Marjorie Taylor Greene at all. I turned it off like halfway through. I don't particularly enjoy listening to her as a person, but that's fine. I mean, you might love Marjorie Taylor Greene, and more power to you. But Tucker Carlson, who is fairly mainstream, he has a really broad reach across independents, really broad reach, was saying the government hates you and wants you dead. If you look at the policies they put into place, if you look at the propaganda, if you look at everything, the government hates you and wants you dead. I was about 2 years ahead of the curve. Anyway, it was an interesting introduction from Tucker Carlson. I'm assuming that everybody's going to call him an anti-Semite. They call me an anti-Semite, and that's fine. If you can't engage with the argument, you just call someone an anti-Semite or a Nazi or a phobe, and that way you don't have to actually address any of the issues. I watched what's his name, Nick Fuentes, for a while, and he has his finger on some of the issues that the young people are facing. I don't particularly enjoy watching him. I don't necessarily agree with his solutions, and he does not seem to me to be a very honest actor. I know that may or may not be a popular opinion, but he seems to vacillate. And I don't mind if someone grows on an issue. Like Tucker Carlson today is completely different than Tucker Carlson 20 years ago. Absolutely night and day. They're two different people. But he explains his journey of how he got there. And I think he's an honest actor. I think Jimmy Dore is an honest actor. And Jimmy Dore is a wildly different person today than he was 10-ish years ago when he was spitting on, what's that guy's name? The Turn of the Frog is gay. I could see him. Raspy voice, kind of fat. Alex Jones, there we go. God, took me forever to pull that one out. Honest actors will adapt their views over time, but you could see the progression. That's, to me, an honest actor. I had a different view of everything 5 years ago. Everything. But I told you honestly what my view was then, and I'm telling you honestly what my view is now. And back to the point of this video, the government hates you and wants you dead. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.